on with their custody litigation.
They didn't want a man that they thought killed their daughter to be raising her beloved children.
A year later, in May 2000, a judge grants the Levines temporary custody. Just days later, they take action.
Carolyn and Larry Levine went to Mexico to take custody of the children.
The arrival of the grandparents was unexpected. The children had gone to school that day, expecting it to be a regular school day. Mr. and Mrs. Levine, accompanied by, as I understand it, it was armed individuals, removed the children from the school, and later that evening flew them to Mexico City and from there to Nashville.
Enraged, Perry fights back.
Carolyn and Larry Levine were accused by Arthur and Perry March of kidnapping the children. It became an unbelievable hate match between the two families.
The federal district judge in Nashville ruled that there was no justification for keeping the children outside their habitual residence of Mexico and ordered the return of the children to Perry March.
Having lost the final round of the custody battle, the Levines raised the stakes.
Lawrence and Carolyn Levine sued Perry March for the wrongful death of their daughter.
I believe her husband murdered her.
Perry refused to come back to Nashville.
Perry is tried in absentia in civil court and found responsible for Janet's death.
The jury rendered a $113.5 million judgment against him, which was one of the highest verdicts in the state at the time.
But in a huge victory for Perry, his Nashville lawyers get the judgment overturned on a technicality. Emboldened by his legal victories, Perry resumes his campaign to clear his name.
In the summer of 2004, Perry sent a photograph he saw in a magazine to the Nashville DA. He claimed this photo showed Janet in an Athens bar with some friends during the Olympic Games. Not a single person who knew Janet believed it could be her. Talk about fanning the flames. This guy was unbelievable.
Our hope was to find her body, and that's what we were really pushing. But the leads began to slow down.
8 long years of intensive investigation have turned up little evidence.
The evidence was what it was. It was possible that the evidence may not get any better. We tried as hard as we could to find her body. We couldn't do it.
The DA decides to roll the dice and indict Perry March for murder.
The district attorney and I sat down and determined now was the time to do it.
Down in Mexico, Perry March has no idea that the noose is tightening. The Nashville DA's office secretly arranges for Perry's extradition.
Once he was expelled by the Mexican authorities, we took custody.
Chaperoned by detectives, Perry boards a plane for Nashville.
He had a meal, he took a nap, read a magazine, and then began to ask about the evidence. How do we know Janet's dead? Did we find her body? Then as time went on, he began to ask, what about if I plead guilty? You tell the DA, Tom Thurman, I want to plead guilty. You tell him that I don't want to do more than 7 years in prison because my wife won't wait for me in Mexico.
So, he was making statements that weren't consistent with that of an innocent person.
But the prosecution still faces an uphill battle.
And you do understand the charges on the indictment, is that correct?
Fairly well. They didn't have a crime scene that they could link Perry to. They didn't have a murder weapon.
We had no evidence to show that a homicide had occurred other than Perry's actions, the type of mother and person Janet was.
They really didn't have anything other than she's gone. We don't think she's coming back, and we think he's responsible.
Thank you, ma'am.
Perry's defense team was so cocky, They thought they'd have him back on the streets before his Guadalajara tan faded. But the plot was about to take a strange twist, involving a jailhouse snitch, an undercover sting, and a surprise witness.
Sent to Nashville City Jail to await trial.
Perry's got 2 jobs to do in custody. That is sit there and keep his mouth shut. But he can't do that.
It seemed Perry March was in love with the sound of his own voice. For almost a decade, he'd been telling his worn-out tale to any media outlet with a working microphone. But now, in jail, his big mouth was about to get him into even bigger trouble.
In the jail, Perry March met up with a inmate from East Nashville who's been in trouble since he was a kid. He had a long criminal history, and the two of them became friends.
His name is Russell Nathaniel Ferris, so we know him as Nate.
One day, Ferris sends a message to the DA that he urgently needs to talk.
And the inmate tells us that Perry March is in the cell next to me, and he's wanting me to kill the Levines.
We were just kind of shocked and amazed when he told us.
To believe that Perry would actually go and try to recruit someone to kill the Levines was incredible to us.
Obviously, we didn't just take his word for it. We said, look, you got to prove it to us. Will he talk about this still? He says, yeah, he talks about it all the time. He never shuts up.
We requested that Nate have a tape recorder with him and record any of these conversations.
Awaiting his own trial for attempted murder, Ferris is more than willing to rat out his neighbor.
Take your time in it. You don't make any mistakes. You work carefully. You figure your trial things. You do what you need to do.
Nathaniel Ferris was supposed to get out. And while he's out on bail, he's supposed to go surveil the Levines, get their patterns down, and then kill both Levines.
I think you just have to remember you got to clear the house with kids, make sure there's no kids there, and then you have to wait for the other time they're there together. Yeah. Keep no trace.
Perry told him that if the Levines are gone and they don't testify at the murder trial, my chances of acquittal go from 50% up to 90%.
Look here, Perry. If they're both in that house, if they answer that door, it's over.
Of all the people he can pick to help him in this conspiracy, he goes and picks a professional snitch. And that's the beauty of Perry. That's just the beauty of being so entirely criminally unsophisticated and too ignorant to know it.
To sweeten the deal, Perry offers up his father's services.
Arthur March was supposed to give the would-be hitman shelter in Mexico.
If my dad thought you were helping me, my dad would go take a bullet for you in the gut.
When you get to Mexico, we'll be drinking Coronas on the beach. You live like a king. So he made all kind of promises to Nate, thinking Nate was going along with this.
Perry even helps Ferris come up with an alias.
First and last, if you can remember, it's going to be easy for you to do. Okay, Bobby Gibbons.
A few weeks later, the plan is set into motion.
Ferris gets out of jail. Perry thinks he's getting out on bond. The reality is we faked that. We put him in another jail in another county.
And he starts making a series of phone calls to Arthur March in Mexico.
Hello? Hello? Is this Colonel?
Yes.
Hey, how you doing? My name's Bobby Gibbons.
When Nate made telephone contact with Arthur, Arthur was not surprised. When Perry said you were going to be calling, I'm supposed to help you out in any way I can.
Is it fun down there?
The sky's blue, the beer's cold, the women are hot. What the hell else do you need?
5 minutes into that conversation, they're talking about getting a gun. 5 minutes into it. 10 minutes later, they're talking about killing the Levines.
Then Arthur starts big talking, telling him how to do it, which type of instrument to use, how to not print up a weapon.
My suggestion is, from the minute the product is got, you wear thin surgeon's gloves.
Yeah, okay.
You do not take them off at all.
All of this stuff is just unsolicited advice.
All told, Farris supplies police with over 6 hours of recordings.
You could not have picked a worse aide de camp in the killing of the Levines than Nathaniel Farris.